First of all, hats off to our final speaker here. The last slot in the agenda is a tough one in the sense that we've all heard a lot of themes today, but I'm glad you hung in there for this one. It's a really great talk from Lena Bologolova. She is the founder of Intellichanges, a firm focused on behavior science. She has a degree from MIT. She's passionate about behavioral science research and its application to decision making. In her talk, Lena challenges how we measure our product design and business outcomes. Lena asserts that often our business objectives don't align with our behavioral objectives, and she'll share how we can best address this and better measure success to drive the desired behaviors, which I think is what we all want. So, Lena?
Hi, everybody. Very excited to chat with you about measurement. Usually not a super exciting topic, but I think it is in behavioral science because what you're really measuring is behavior. And that's something we all can relate to. And it really brings everything together from the previous part of the conference, which is thinking about inclusivity, thinking about motivation, and measurement is the best way to guarantee both of those. Next, I'll spend a little bit of time telling you why you should listen to me when thinking about this. Professionally, I really think in numbers. So I have a degree from MIT in mathematics and neuroscience. So I did computational neuroscience there. And then went and continued my education at UCLA Anderson, specifically in financial decision making. And I've essentially been a startup advisor and investor, and I have been consulting, doing specifically this type of work, but really thinking about how do we change the behavior of people, but also the people that are designing the experiments to make sure we're tracking the right types of things. And then really the idea of how do we make sure that all of this research that exists and is sitting in file cabinets in academia is translated in the right way for everyone to use. So thinking about that brought me closer to the Behavioral Science Policy Association. And I am one of the people working with them to start something called the Applied Behavioral Science Association, that is a global organization bringing together nonprofit, for-profit, policy, and academia to make sure we advance the field of applied behavioral science. And personally, I want to say that I've used behavioral science on a personal level, first for Goldman Sachs to make money, but that was more for Goldman and not for myself. But I've actually used it to lose weight. I've used it to play more tennis. I've used it to be practicing music more. And I've used having a dog actually to make myself exercise and walk more by having that be a behavioral trigger. So what are we going to talk about? So first, I'm going to put on my professor hat. And we're going to go through some behavioral science basics, which we may have already gone through, but just want to put you in that headspace. And then we'll also do a few definitions. So we'll kind of go through that pretty quickly. And then we will go through a measurement process. What does it look like to actually introduce the right type of behavioral science measurement? And then we'll go through the part that probably you guys are most excited about, some real life examples. And here I have my kind of product manager CEO hat on to make sure that we take these behavioral science basics and implement them to the process, basically achieving the goals that companies want. So let's go through the basics. Imagine there's a girl named Anna. And the only thing that you know about Anna is that she read fluently at the age of 4. And the only question that you're asked is, what was her GPA in college? And GPA, for anybody that doesn't know, in the United States is up to a 4.0. So that's kind of an A type of grade. So for most people, the average comes out around 3.7, 3.8, 3.9. Why is that happening? Well, the reason that it's happening is the fact that she read fluently at age 4 means that she's smart. That's the first connection that you make automatically. And what that makes you think is, okay, she's smart. That means she must have had a high GPA. And this has been rerun and rerun and rerun with many, many people, professors, students, executives, and basically you see the exact same result. The automatic response, even if you realize that you don't have enough information in this case, all you know about her is that she read fluently at age 4. She could have fallen in, with a bad crowd in high school, and her GPA in college would have been bad. But the automatic number still sticks in our brain. What about this problem? 117 times 243. It's a little bit different. You can probably get a feel for an estimate, right? An estimate about what this number will or will not be. But to actually get an exact number answer, you're going to have to sit down, reach back into your mind from when you were in elementary school and write out, this is how you do multiplication, this is the answer. So this is really deliberative type of thinking that's a lot slower. Nothing automatic really came up, right? What came up automatically is, oh crap, I have to do this. So this is really outlining these two different systems. One is this automatic, emotional, habit, belief-driven system. And the second one is this more slow, effortful, logical system. And there's actually a connection between the two of them, right? In the first example with Anna, we questioned, hey, did we have enough information to actually make a decision about that? And by doing that, we became more logical. We planned more. We were problem solving. We were questioning things. And what that actually means is that we moved from system 1, hey, my automatic response is 3.7, to thinking about something in a more effortful and logical way. And what our goal is, historically, when we started as hunter-gatherers, we didn't know how to do anything. So everything was slow and effortful. But it's as we've had to work more, what we've realized is that system 1 is something that we need more and more of, and very specific few things should have the exercise of system 2. Few definitions. Status quo bias. So this is this automatic system 1 bias that people are going to prefer things will stay the same by doing minimal work. So essentially, if someone gives me a default choice, I'm going to stick with it. Or whatever I did yesterday, I'm going to do it again today. So really change is hard because of that. Present bias is another system 1 thing, which is basically our propensity to overvalue what's happening right now versus what's happening later. So the way that we combat this is, whenever possible, we should get people to make decisions that go in effect tomorrow, never today. Because if once you're competing with what's happening today, you're never going to win, because the thing that's happening today is always going to win from an attention perspective. Reciprocity. So this is something that we understand really well from relationship building. But that same type of relationship building can happen with an application or with a product. So people want to reward a system, a product, a person that does something good and helpful, and punish the system and person that impedes their progress or wastes certain time. And so this is especially important in early interactions that are building trust. And I think that that's really important to think about in any product experience from a design perspective. And then finally, framing, which we all know really, really well. People are going to rely on these concepts and values we've internalized, again, system 1, to give meaning to any new information that comes into our sphere. So kind of like the example I used with Goldman Sachs, when I presented information to people that were specific, so in the frame of a specific number or an odd number, their interpretation of it changed. And that's something called precision effect. And that's something that made people trust it a little bit more. And now we'll go through probably the most important definition, which is thinking about what a key performance indicator or outcome is and how we think about it as leaders at companies, and how maybe they're not the best way of defining it. So a really typical one would be, hey, I want 1,000 new app downloads by the end of 2020. But is downloading an app actually doing anything? It doesn't mean the customer has actually gotten any value. It's a metric that's good for the company, but it's not really good for the actual user. And specifically, there's a concept called perceived usefulness there. Is the customer thinking that there's anything useful in this? Well, in this case, no. What about when they open the app? What is the amount of work they have to do versus what you're actually giving back to them? So this is reciprocity again. And then the second one, increasing monthly active users by 10%. I've worked with a bunch of companies that have goals like this, where they set a specific goal for their monthly active users and try and get it by end of the quarter. But what incentive is monthly active users setting for designers and product managers to build features? Is it really setting the right expectations? Is it really something that's prioritizing opening an app and not doing anything of value? Or is it actually doing something to, in this case, maybe increase the savings or get people to change their diet or whatever it is that you want the behavior change to be for the customer? So in this case, you can get them to open it, but if they don't do anything else afterwards, does that count as activity? What activity is useful? And really what that means is that we want to move into a direction of more specific behavioral-based metrics. So in this case, something like, hey, 75% of new app customers are going to connect to at least one bank. So really, they're going to feel like they got something. They're going to connect to a bank, which means they see all their information coming in and they personalize it, right? And then they also start some savings challenge of at least $50. So they see the value of opening up and connecting to their bank. And if the app's goal is to get you to save, then introducing a savings challenge. So the suggested how-to measurement process based on this idea. So first, what we're going to think about is what are the common barriers to actually implementing measurement through behavioral science? Like, I really want to make sure that we think about all of those because they're barriers that we're going to need to fix and really focus on one. One is, where do I start, right? So behavioral science is about humans and our behavior. So that's everything. That's HR, that's product, that's marketing, that's legal, that's literally everything. So people don't know where to start. Where should I put it? Where is the utility of this thing called behavioral science or behavior change design going to be useful? Status quo bias, which we went over a little bit, there's always going to be resistance to trying something new. Some people may embrace it. Some people may think it's really easy. And some people may think that, hey, I can just figure this out on my own in a few days and that's it. And then the one that I'm going to focus on is the organizational structure. So there's many behavioral change efforts often that kind of cut across traditional departmental lines. So for example, you have a product manager that needs a designer, that needs an engineer, that needs a data scientist, that needs a user researcher to own and answer certain questions that then affect a particular thing. So how do we think about metrics that go across traditional departmental lines? What ownership do you have to changing that behavior? Is understanding why this behavior needs to be changed just as important as actually changing it? And then that means, how is it measured? And really the process that I'd like to go through is really threefold. One is identifying potential specific customer behavioral problems. So let's take all the stuff that's been done from a research perspective, data perspective, understanding the when, the how, and the why of current behaviors of people that are using your product or ones that you hypothesize of how they'll use it. Take and map out all of their behaviors. Identify all of the barriers and benefits to those specific behaviors that you want them to achieve. And then review relevant literature on top of it to identify what behavioral science concepts can actually affect those things. So once you've got these potential problems, whether they're specific to your product or they're big global type of problems, you want to confirm the value. And really what that means is it good for the customer long term? So we have, again, a bias of present bias. So we want to make sure that is this going to be good for the long term? Is this good for the company in terms of mission? Is it good for company employee motivation and inclusion? Is it good for the community? And is it easy to track, right? Sometimes a change is really hard to track. Sometimes it's easy. And based on all of these things, if you check most of these boxes or all of these boxes, then it's a behavior that is worth defining a metric around. And so then what you want to do is you want to define clear cross-functional ownership. Joint metrics are the best motivator and incentives for actually getting things done. And I've seen that at a bunch of companies. Getting someone from HR to work together with a product manager sometimes is the best way to get things done, because the ideas from a diversity of thought perspective are the best, but then also because the motivation is also great. And finally, thinking about the actual concept application protocol, making it a structured experiment and backend tracking setup. So right now, we're just going to go through some real life behavioral science examples talking about this. So this is a real life example. This is Uber Eats. And the problem that I've created that they thought was a big one, hypothetically, working backwards from the behavior that they were changing, was that they had a big statistic that showed that there was an irresponsible waste of utensils behavior by people in the United States, and it made them connected to not supporting the community. So their metric would then be, hey, let's get new Uber Eats customers to not request utensils. That would be one. Or get existing customers to request them less than they have before. Those are clear, very specific metrics that you could put numbers around. And in this case, they understand the fact that people prefer to do nothing. So this is defaults, status quo bias, and use defaults and framing to save the environment and keep the community clean by defaulting to not including utensils. Not only that, they communicated that, hey, by doing this, you're serving your community. So it's good for customer long-term. It's good for the company and teams because it's part of their mission. It's good for company employee motivation, probably because it makes them feel more connected to the community. It's good for the society and community. And it's really easy to track. Did people or did they not request utensils? This one isn't a good one. And I purposely wanted to do one that wasn't a good one. So for example, a credit card company may think that, hey, a lot of people are calling in and complaining about credit card fees, right? So fees when you don't pay, even the minimum amount. And so the metric that they set is more than 50% of all new credit card customers pay something off per month. So on the surface, that looks good, right? You're getting someone to pay and they're reducing the percentage that they're charged in terms of interest. But is that actually good for the customer long-term? No. Is it good for the company and teams? It depends on what the mission is. Is it good for employee motivation? It depends. Maybe short-term motivation to get more numbers and get people to basically stop complaining, but maybe it's really bad because they realize that they're tricking people into doing something else. Good for the society and community? Definitely no. And is it easy to measure? Yes. And so what a bunch of companies did, and there was actually a law enacted in 2009 to limit the ability to do this, is using framing here of minimum payment and defaulting to that, which people are not going to move away from the default. They're going to pay something, but it's going to be the wrong amount. Next. So whenever we have an onboarding process into a product, people are signing in, they're giving you information, they're doing work, they're reading with no clear benefit. So they got there from a marketing perspective. And so they're dropping off because they don't want to finish the process. So there's this reciprocity problem, and it's an experiential customer satisfaction problem. So one of the metrics that I've used and a few other people have used in the behavioral science space is let's actually think about what is the best mix between system 1 and system 2 by measuring average time spent on each screen versus the expected behavior. And really, you want to have a lot more system 1, which is like the automatic, I don't have to do a lot of thinking and a lot of work, so that I don't feel like there's a lot of reciprocity happening that I need to give back to the customer. And then the few things that I really want them to pay attention to, then that's where I spend the most amount of time and build the commitment and build the experience. Another really good example is, again, from Uber. So Uber has a really robust behavioral science team. And this is a really great example, and that I recommend actually reading if you're interested, because they talk about how they built out their behavioral science team. But the idea was when they introduced the concept of an express pool. So an express pool is essentially, instead of taking a trip with other people, you're taking a trip with other people, not necessarily from your location. So you have to go somewhere else to meet them. And so a lot of people were canceling because of timing. So between the request and the matching, because it took too long. And so their goal was, hey, let's figure out a way to decrease this post-request cancellation rate by at least 10%. And I made that number up, but by a certain amount that they decided on. And in this case, Uber used behavioral science concepts like operational transparency and goal gradient effect. So they highlighted step-by-step progress during the wait time. So they basically gave you a lot of content to consume to make sure that you didn't feel the time as being wasted. And then finally is probably one of my favorite examples, and a company that uses behavioral science in every component of what it does, and it's something that I've used to a certain degree with a bunch of my clients, which is thinking about trust. So in this case, Lemonade, an insurance company that you all have heard of, I'm sure, that has Dan Ariely as their chief behavioral officer. They identified the problem as, hey, mutual distrust is the bane of the insurance industry. So it's $1 trillion problem. And so if trust is a problem, then are people satisfied with the experience that they have with insurance companies? No. Most of the ratings of insurance companies are really, really bad. So they kind of want to turn that concept on its head, and they thought about, how can we do that? How can, from the very beginning of building a company, can we have a metric that then looks at trust and thinks about trust? And so the metric that I suggested to them was achieving #1 customer ranking by increasing trust and customer satisfaction with using insurance compared to the industry baseline. And so what ends up happening is that they basically end up employing a bunch of little things using behavioral science, like operational transparency, like showing how quickly they can get something done and what are the steps that they're taking, so nothing hidden. They're also essentially having users sign an honesty pledge. So if you sign at the beginning of your experience working with Lemonade as a user, sign an honesty pledge, you're essentially expecting reciprocity now from Lemonade to be honest with you. So it's kind of like a little bit of a trick there. They gave quick validation. So, right, so part of the distrust came from the fact that taking all of these insurance claims took forever. So they changed that experience by making it really, really fast and very transparent. And then they also added a level of charity here. So every insurance company has leftover money at the end of the year where they said, hey, we didn't use this money, let's donate it for a good cause, because that builds trust in the system as well. And so they were actually able to achieve the best customer ranking of an insurance company in, I think, less than 3 years just by doing that. They actually took, within 3 years, 10% market share and saw 500% growth in just 3 years. So really the idea here is, what are the things that we can do that are metrics that think about the behavior of the customer first, and then how do you think about value to the company, to your employees, to the society at large? So in this case, society. In this case, employees. In this case, the customer was #1. Thank you very much. I'm excited to answer any questions that you may have right now. And that's it. Thank you.
I think that's my favorite sound effect, by the way. I can't tell
I
if
was
it's
going to
fake
say, that
enthusiasm.
seems like a really nice one.
Yes.
I love
Hey,
that.
great job.
I don't know if anybody's ever, thank you, if anyone's ever seen the social proof videos where they take away the laugh track and how it feels super awkward.
Yeah,
So
I have
those are
seen,
some of my
I have
favorites.
not seen the social proof yet, but I have seen that effect demonstrated. Yeah, it is interesting. Being human is weird, as you know.
Yep. That's what
I
makes
do
it
have a couple,
fun.
that is what makes it fun. It makes your job fun, especially, and certainly ours. I do have a couple questions here. Thanks for joining us. Great talk. Would love for you to answer a couple questions before we head out to
Sure.
some networking stuff. Sound good? Okay,
Perfect.
so how do you help stakeholders see that behavioral measurements are a good predictor compared to the KPI type measurements maybe that they're used to working with?
So I think the way that you test I've seen done is you need to introduce them at the same time. I don't think you're ever going to be able to introduce just, a new metric and say that that's the be all end all, especially because in a lot of cases, sometimes you don't know what the be all end all behavioral metric is. It's kind of a work in progress. And so you have a hypothesis. And if you can show causation and correlation between trust in some cases and the usage, that's the best way to do it. So basically introducing a customer satisfaction score in addition to a monthly active user score, and showing that if one is going up, the other one is also going up. Showing that correlation really, really clearly on even a small, tiny experiment would be really, really, really useful. Sometimes it's enough to also just do some qualitative research and show that too.
Another one here, really about the value of behavior change. So how do you express the differential value of behavior change when you might hear other teams say, we already do that? This is somebody who's mentioning they encounter that mostly with like a market research team, since they have deep research on customers and they might believe that they already understand the behavior. How do you overcome that and help them see that it's a whole practice unto itself?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things is showing people the difference between what people say they will do versus what they actually do. So that's in terms of analyzing like real life behavior versus what the research shows if you're just running like a survey and things like that. So showcasing the differences between that and showing very clear cut examples usually works. And then also bringing them into the fold and showing them how you can use the research that they've done to then motivate what you're actually doing as a behavior change designer or a researcher, so that they have incentive and motivation to then join you on the journey of understanding it. So what are the things that you learned that you want to prove or disprove in the behavior, in the actual behavior that's being exhibited? And then if they see that it's disproven, then it's a very clear relationship building exercise as well.
That's great. Good. Last one here. What's the right level of transparency so that customers develop trust but don't feel overwhelmed or bored? It's probably a tough one to answer.
Great question. That's a really great question, but it's also a really tough one because it's personalized, right? Like everybody has a different angle to this. And the way that I always approach this is thinking about the antecedents of choice overload. And one of the antecedents of choice overload is thinking about what is someone's decision intent. And if your decision intent is really low, like I'm just here to browse, the more information I see in front of me is actually great. And so seeing more information is going to actually make me feel like there's trust involved. Whereas if you're someone that has decision intent, that's like, I just need to buy something, making sure that the buying process is secure and has all of the components that are really clear to get me to my goal and less choices will then build trust, because then you're answering my personal question. So I don't know if that kind of gets at that personalization, but really thinking about what state and what mindset is the person in that you're trying to get to do X, Y, and Z or change their behavior in some way. And then once that happens, how are you designing a product to do that? Because if someone feels like they're being met where they're at, that's how you build trust. That's when I mentioned like reciprocity. Like early on in a relationship, you're not going to like give someone like flowers every single day. You're not going to send them chocolates every single day. You're going to do little things. And so that's dependent on the status of your relationship.
That's great. Yeah, that's very related to the topic that preceded you with Justin talking about relationship design and kind of where we're headed with just a deeper level of personalization and adjustment. Awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. It was great to hear you talk on the topic, and really appreciate you closing out the show. So thanks for being with us, Lena.
Thanks so much. Such a pleasure.